Today I'm going to do a little review of a book I read, not just for the event Dinovember, which was created by Andreea at Infinite Text and Bryan at Bad Taste Books. Cool event. It doesn't take much arm twisting to get me to read something involving dinosaurs. I love them, of course, and I love any kind of monstery thing, large and or small and scary, whatever. This was a good excuse to get me to finally make my way through a book I've had in my collection for years and years, decades, and that's this, Dinosaur Planet by Anne McCaffrey. Now, this is the 8th printing from 1984, so I guess published just right before its sequel, Survivors, came out, or this is the 8th edition, but originally this was published in 1978. It's got a great Daryl K. Sweet cover with a brontosaurus munching some vegetation in the background, and what I assume is one of the main characters, co-leader Varian, carrying an Eohippus, ancient kind of ancestor of our horse today. Maybe one of the heavy worlders, as I'll talk about more, and that are heavily involved, no pun intended, in the plot of this novel. Now, just to talk a little bit about Anne McCaffrey, I don't have a lot of experience reading Miss McCaffrey's work. The main thing I remember her for, of course, is the Dragon Riders of Pern series she did. I guess there's several novellas and short stories, as well as novels. The only experience I've had of that series was in, I believe, my 7th grade class. One of my teachers, maybe a homeroom teacher or study hall teacher, reading The White Dragon, one of her Pern novels, maybe an early one. I'm not 100% sure which one was first, but reading that to us in class, and I don't know if we ever finished it, but I enjoyed it at the time, of course. Of course, anything that was involving dragons and not more boring, prosaic school subjects probably caught my interest, but I haven't read much of anything else by her since. Anne McCaffrey was born in 1926, and she passed away in 2011. She was a U.S. writer that eventually relocated with her 2 children to Ireland. And she had a pretty successful career, wrote a lot of books. I don't believe anyone will probably put Dinosaur Planet and its sequel, The Survivors, among her very best. But, you know, this cover is what sold me on this book, and I've had it for years in my collection, and I was never going to get rid of it. I always wanted to try to get around to it and read through it. Several times in the past I've tried to read it, and I was put off by the very slow developed and opening chapters of this book. It does kick into gear slightly as it goes on and gets more interesting. I wouldn't say it's by any means a perfect book. It's flawed in many ways, but it retains enough interest in its basic premise and some of the other things that McCaffrey is got going on here to keep me reading to the end this time. And I'm glad I finished it. So let's talk a little bit about it. Now, I know Deb recorded a review about this and its sequel. 2 really good videos. I'll have them linked down below. Deb at Omnivorous Reader, has a biology background, and I believe that's her field where she works in as well, or at least something related to it. Pardon me, Deb, if I can't remember your exact qualifications there. But she had a certain approach or a certain reaction to this book coming through that lens, which I think is very interesting. And she has a lot of great things to say about the book, both pro and con, and its sequel. But her edition, her Australian edition, I believe it was an Orbit book, had a different cover. This is a Daryl K. Sweet cover, like I mentioned. And also she said the back blurb on her edition rather spoils the novel. Now, the title, of course, does that. I would be very curious if this was McCaffrey's original title. She perhaps was kind of forced to put this title on it by the publisher. I can't blame the publisher. The whole reason why I bought this book in the first place, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, was because it was called Dinosaur Planet and had dinosaurs on the cover. That's why I would want to buy it in the first place. So I can see, the point of view of a publisher wanting to spoilerize that aspect. Because one of the whole conundrums that McCaffrey presents in this is, why are there Earth-type dinosaurs on this alien planet? Anyway, let me read the back blurb here, okay? Stranded on a strange world, The mission, the exploratory and evaluation corps of the Federated Sentient Planets, had sent Arc-10, that's the mother ship that our main characters have been taken, have come from in a shuttle down to the planet Areta, as they call it. Had sent Arc-10 with its mixed crew of shipbred and planet-bound technicians to Areta to catalog fauna and flora and search for new energy sources. It was a simple mission, a standard crew. The problem: Kai and his beautiful co-leader Varian, the best Xenob vet in the business, followed all the standard procedures, but the results of their investigations were totally unexpected. Not only were the planet's creatures larger than anyone had anticipated, and the geological finds smaller, but the rescue ship had inexplicably disappeared. Now again, there is no rescue ship, just the mother ship. The Arc-10 is the mother ship, I believe, and they are in the shuttle, a bigger shuttlecraft that comes down to this planet. The nightmare. Then suddenly, on a world of giant swamp creatures and deadly predators, a curious change had come over many of the members of the Arc-10 crew, a change that would lead all of them, in one way or another, into the primitive darkness of a future world. So, I don't believe this spoils a lot, really. It just kind of whets the appetite, I suppose, although maybe sounding a little more dramatic than events actually unfold in the novel. So what we have here, we have Kai and his co-leader Varian. Now, they're on this planet. Mostly, they're motivated to find some ore deposits, things that are, very valuable for powering the Federation, the other planets in this Federation that are very hungry for fuel and other these kind of mineral deposits and transuranics, I guess, is some of the things they mention here. And the more they find, the various team members who find some geological, mother lodes of this kind of material will get increased bonuses. And this will also be spread out through the rest of the crew in smaller percentages. There's 3 types of humans on this crew. There is the shipbred, as they're called, such as leader Kai or co-leader Kai, the male leader of this group, this crew, who was bred on a ship and therefore has a lighter build and not as much strength as a land living heavy worlder. These are the other components of the crew, the heavy worlders, who are huge and muscular, not huge, I should say, but much more powerfully built and more stolid, I guess, more usually very calm, stoic types, and rumored to, we'll get into this more later, but rumored to have once been meat eaters. Ooh. And the other kind, like Varian, Kai's, romantic partner and co-leader, which doesn't seem like a good idea for them to be romantic partners as well, but works out okay in this novel, I guess. They work well together, both professionally and emotionally connected. Anyway, she has spent a lot of time on ships, but she grew up with her parents were also exobiologists, exobs as they're known here, and she grew up on several planets and had lots of experience with the creatures of those different planets. So she's quite comfortable on land and off the ship. And then there's some others like the physician of the crew, the medic Lunzi, who seems to have also more planet-born background, but is also ascribing completely to the kind of utopian ideal of this group of sentient planets, which is veganism, not to eat any animal flesh or perhaps even animal products. So the problem with this kind of scientific-based and almost utopian or evolved sort of crew, at least in its beginning part of this novel, is it's pretty bland. There's not a lot of conflict. And they're going around exploring this planet, which apparently stinks and is very primeval. It's hot and humid and vegetation everywhere, etc. And then some strange things start to occur. Now, they're used to being sent down to these planets. Again, this is Kai's first full-on expedition in control of it as a co-leader. And he's really wanting everything to go well. But some anomalies occur, including some cores that they find that were planted, it seems like, perhaps even 1 million years ago. Very, very old cores, seemingly of alien design, designed by this other race that the humans are associated with in this kind of planetary alliance, sentient planetary alliance, which has many species, including this bird-like species called the Rixie, and the silicon-based rock, slow-talking, slow-to-action, long-lived creatures called the Thek. And this seems to be this probe, or these cores, as they call them, against their sensors for geological surveys to test what sort of minerals or the like could be found in the area. They find a bunch of these old cores, and that's why that kind of answers why they haven't been able to find anything in their immediate radius of where they landed the ship worth of any value for the minerals that they're looking for. So they're wondering was this planet surveyed before? Was a team must have been here before? It's not customary to send exploration teams down to planets that have already been visited. Did the Theks make a mistake and send them there? What's going on? And then one of the characters, a geologist, I believe he's a geologist named Gaber, comes to Kai and says, I think we've been planted. And now what planted means is, in some cases, these teams have been sent to these planets because their home worlds are overpopulated and they kind of want to colonize other planets, and they're sometimes unwittingly set down on a planet and then planted, meaning they're not evacuated afterwards by the mother ship. They are left there to develop a society on this new world. And this Gaber guy thinks we've been planted. And Kai's like, bothered by this idea and definitely kind of angry at Gaber. Don't spread this. It's going to cause all sorts of problems. Don't say anything about it. It's obvious hogwash. We don't have a big enough group to make up a fresh gene pool and there's various other things that makes him think it couldn't possibly be true that they are planted there. But other things start to happen as they're going around doing their geological surveys, and Varian catalogs some life forms. They're tagging them and observing them and studying them, and no one seems to make the connection that these are freaking dinosaurs running around the place. Now, if you want to pick up this book for some dino munching action where Jurassic Park is happening and dinosaurs are attacking and there's some human dinosaur conflict, there's very little of that, okay? But some of these vague uneasiness of things going on do start to pile up and add a little tension right around the 50-page mark or so. We get through this slow, technobabbly sort of opening, which is a lot of exposition and setting up what's happening, and hampered a bit by these characters being okay, but there's too many of them. Not enough of them are properly fleshed out. And even the few that are, Kai, Varian, Bonnard, Lundsey, there's not a lot of depth to these characters. What happens next, as is hinted at in the blurb, is that something seems to be coming over the heavy worlders and changing their attitude slightly. They start doing some things that are new or unexpected, at least from the shipbred perspective, the vegan perspective. Now, this is where I have to kind of go into spoilers, because it's hard to talk about some of the problems with this book as well as its strong points, the few that it has, without going into spoilers. So consider this a spoiler notice. I'm going to go into this more spoiler section after this. Spoilers ahoy now. Okay, so some of the interesting parts are also the irritating parts with this book. So the heavy worlders are rumored to have to be, at least in their home worlds, because of a lack of vegetation, etc. They were forced to become meat eaters. Now, the whole premise of this future sentient society of different planets is they don't eat flesh, and it's abhorrent to them. The shipbread and kind of non-heavy worlder humans like Varian and Lunzi and Kai are full of revulsion over the idea of eating meat. They eat protein substitutes and various things culled from various vegetable sources. And I have no idea if McCaffrey was a vegan or not, or she's just extrapolating what might go through the mind of such a person in this kind of situation in this future society. But it's very ham-fisted, ooh, meat eaters bad. What happens basically is heavy worlders, headed by a guy named Pascuti, and there's several others. There's so many names, and without really registering a lot of who is who, there's some other humans, secondary human shipbread types and vegan types, and then the heavy welder types, and it's kind of hard to tell them apart by the names, other than a few of the ones that stand out. And Pascuti is the chief one, who seems to be the one who's the leader of the heavy welders, or develops as a leader. Eventually, they start to turn more savage, apparently, because they start eating meat. Horrors. Anyway, the way it's presented is a little ridiculous, a little silly, but it does add what conflict there is in the book. So something starts to happen where Varian is out one day with and they have these sleds. They have a main shuttle that's landed on the planet, and they put together little pods, etc. And they have a force field fence around to keep the insects out and any other creatures that might come in. And when they find a creature, quite often they find some that are wounded, like some kind of mid-sized dinosaur and this baby Eohippus that they rescue at one point, and they call it Dandy. And Varian is studying these and trying to heal them because she's also kind of a vet. At any rate, Varian's out checking out, trying to find out more information about what she calls Fangface, this big predator dinosaur, which of course is a T-Rex, the way it's described. But Anne McCaffrey is pretty coy about using any actual dinosaur terms until the very end of the novel, when it's quite obvious to us from the novel's title, that these are dinosaurs. At any rate, she notices the kind of increased passion from these otherwise stoic heavy worlders, getting more and more excited about the violence they're seeing from the predators, what it's rendering on other dinosaurs. They secretly sneak off and start eating meat, killing dinosaurs, hunting them, eating them for food, having a good old party. And in the meantime, Gaber has apparently spilled the beans, what he thinks that we're being planted, and I'm going to, and he's kind of working with them to take control of the expedition on this planet, wrest control away from the leaders. They're becoming increasingly more flippant and contemptuous of the shipbred people and the non-heavy worlders, and eventually they stage a mutiny. And this is where we get to the one exciting part of the novel, kind of at the end. There's also this running thread of these, what they call kind of golden flyers. Varian calls them gifts, I think, or one of the kids calls them gifts, gives them that name. And these appear to be, and they're identified at the very end towards the end of the book as pteranodons, but they're starting to establish tool making. They make nets, which they use, and they work together and doing teamwork to catch fish, to share amongst them, amongst their groups of animals. And while it might be a stretch to imagine pteranodons developing this kind of intelligence, it's one of the more interesting parts of the book, but it's kind of gone over in such clinical or over length of studying. Varian's just fascinated by them, as she would be as an exobiologist, and spends a lot of time observing them. But while this is interesting to a point, it doesn't really further the story along. It actually kind of kind of stretches out the middle section of the story before we get to the mutiny, which happens a little too fast and quickly to be fully believable. And Pascuti and his heavy wielders come in and smash and grab basically, and their plan is to basically force with their power sleds, force a stampede of dinosaurs, which they've already done. It's stampeding towards the shuttle and the kind of encampment, the base. They've already established separate base camps, and they're going to just take everything of value and leave these non-heavy worlders to get smashed to a pulp by the stampede. And so it'll look like if they weren't planted, hey, there was a stampede and we're lucky enough to get out, and they have a kind of get out of jail free card that way. And this is a real rambling review, sorry, but one of the interesting things also that McCaffrey doesn't really develop, but she brings up, is Kai, Varian, Lunzi, and one other, I think it's Triv, one other shipbred or non-heavy worlder, are what they call followers of discipline. Now, this is like what is presented as maybe a kind of cross between mental, powerful Zen-like state and also some martial arts, perhaps. And so you're kind of thinking, all right, Pascuti's coming in with his bad guys here. They're going to take over. They're smashing people around, and they're holding one of the poor younger girls by the hair, and they're going to, breaking people's limbs and such as they're coming in and stomping all over the place. And now maybe we're going to get a throwdown between Kai and taking on Pascuti, and we're going to see if his discipline will help him go against this much larger opponent and stronger opponent. Doesn't really work out that way. But I think that's a missed opportunity on McCaffrey's part. From what I know of her past books, she's not big on, action and violent confrontation anyway. So, and some readers might not be anyway, but I certainly would have enjoyed some of that if that had come in here. There is some other fun, suspenseful parts at the end of this thing, which make it interesting. And basically, they do manage to escape, most of them with their lives intact, and go off, hide away in a previously discovered cave, hide their shuttle so the heavy wielders can't find them, hopefully, and then they go into kind of a form of cryo sleep, just what they call deep sleep or long sleep or something, hoping that the message that Kai sent out before the comms were destroyed by Pascuti and his heavy wielder brethren will eventually reach the Thek, one of a Thek that has some history with Kai's family, and maybe they'll come and investigate and rescue them. In the meantime, they're going to wait it out and see what happens. And then what happens comes in the sequel, Survivors, which Deb has also reviewed recently, and I'll link that one down below. So, pros and cons. Pros, well, I'm a sucker for this planetary survey exploration team concept. I like to read it. The scientific team comes down to a planet. There's kind of a mystery. They get involved and hopefully have to fight off some inimical life or creatures. That kind of thing is really cool. I like that kind of premise, that we have that premise here, even if it's rather antiseptic in the way it's treated. Dinosaurs, right? Even though they're not named as such for much of the book, I didn't know ahead of time that the heavy wielders were going to revolt, and so that possibility, as it slowly developed, did add a nice bit of tension, slowly ratcheting tension, although it was rather abruptly came to a head at the end, maybe a little bit clunky in the way it was, the way it was teased, and then full force. But that worked well enough, and the conclusion, as I said, was still pretty exciting, even if this so-called discipline only really came into play for pain control rather than any sort of hand-to-hand stuff that I would have liked to have seen. Lastly, there were some interesting conundrums posed. For example, was the team planted? What was up with the previous survey, maybe from thousands or years or even millennia before? What was going on there? Why were they back? Why were there these dinosaurs from Earth planted or seemingly placed on this planet, not along with the kind of native more odd and alien native species to the planet, what was going on there. And that was intriguing. And also what's going on with the evolution of possibly to a higher level of intelligence of these pteranodons. Now, things I didn't like, slow start. And again, it's not really a quick-paced read. I mean, it's 202 pages. I got through it, moderately easily, because McCaffrey's not a bad writer, but this is not one of her shining examples of great prose, for sure. Too many characters, a lot of names, not many register as actual, rounded characters, and even the main ones that do get a lot of attention. And our point of view characters are kind of alternate between Kai and Varian, the male and female co-leaders. Mostly Kai, but several chapters or several portions are from Varian's point of view. They're okay. None of these are particularly wonderful characters, but interesting enough, I suppose. The number one thing that kind of bugged me was this whole veganism is great and meat eating makes you a savage barbarian thing. I think that was a possible interesting premise, or theme, but was handled in a rather clunky and rather silly and forced fashion a bit. And I would have liked more dinosaur versus human kind of scenes or action, and more, I have to confess to being rather underwhelmed by the cliffhanger, although I guess if you read this with its sequel, now the sequel didn't come out to 1984, so 6 years later, so probably would be best read back to back, although I haven't heard much intriguing about the sequel. It gets a lower rating, I do believe, than this one on Goodreads. Not that that really means anything. Anyhow, long and rambling review, end of the spoiler section. Should you read this? Well, I think it was not bad. I enjoyed it enough, and I'm glad I finally read it. Dinovember got me to finally pull this off the shelf and get through it. I've had it for a long time. Don't remember coming across the sequel, Survivors, before, but this one I used to see all the time, and it was a fun read to an extent, So I would say pretty good, okay, not great. Your mileage may vary. So as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for bearing with my long-winded jibber-jabberings about various books and book-related stuff. And I hope you're having a great reading month yourself, and I will see you in a future video. Thanks a bunch.